Hi everybody, Andy Reynolds here, COO and financial advocate with Ballast. I'm excited today to have Michelle Diamond here from Cumberland Trust out of Nashville up in Lexington for a couple days for a conference.
That's right, yes.
And we're excited to share a little bit about Cumberland Trust, a little bit about corporate trustee work. Some of our clients have already experienced this, some have no clue what we're talking about. So just before we jump into the fund trust world, tell us a little bit about you and your background and how you got involved with Cumberland Trust.
Great. Well, Andy, thanks so much for having me today. Michelle Diamond, currently Chief Development Officer at Cumberland Trust. A little bit about my background. This world is what I've been doing for almost 30 years now. Had the privilege after college to land with a wonderful gentleman at a regional bank in Nashville, Tennessee. Learned a little bit about the trust business, and about 6 years in, he said, let's go start a trust company. And having an opportunity to have that kind of like groundwork in a bank trust department, learn there was a great opportunity. Having the privilege to start Cumberland Trust as an independent trust company, this is what I've done my whole life. And so I'm really excited because I think this opportunity to work with advisors, work with families, work in developing markets, have an opportunity. So this is what I do, and I love it. So.
I love it. Similar to me, I kind of started here, grew up here, and I've been doing this ever since right out of college.
I tried to say I was 12. I don't get by with that anymore, but yes.
No. Well, very good. Well, so for some people who may, we were talking just a little bit ago, I think some of our clients, one, don't think they have enough money for trusts.
Right.
Two, may not need a corporate trustee or have no idea what a corporate trustee is, or have a very different perception of a corporate trustee from experiences or whatnot. So before we talk too much about Cumberland or a directed versus delegated trust company, let's just talk about trusts and corporate trustees.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about why someone would want a corporate trustee to begin with.
Right.
And what you guys see beneficiaries seeing a benefit from that.
Well, I think there's often the perception that trust or estate planning is primarily tax driven, and the tax reasons for establishing trusts are significant and definitely one of the reasons that they happen.
And used to be much more inclusive.
Yes, absolutely. And I have a slide I'll share with you at some point, but it has like 10 or 12 other reasons that folks can use trust or to establish trust. And sometimes there's charitable intent. Sometimes it's asset protection. Sometimes it's spendthrift provisions. Sometimes it's providing for adults or children with special needs. And so there are so many reasons that when families contemplate how trust can be beneficial as part of their estate plan, it is definitely in addition to the tax benefits that can be there. And I also think that historically, bank trust departments, that was a place to go to get trust. And we knew our local bankers and we knew the people who were going to be serving our families. And so it was just a natural extension in that establishment of a trust to use that local banker. And then as things have changed in our industry and bank consolidation and relationship management and banks also being in the asset management business, so many families who have created wealth and are now preserving wealth with their advisors, I think the solution of looking at a corporate trustee is who's going to be a part of that relationship. And so as things changed over the years, there was a significant push to individual or family members as trustees. And I think sometimes that's a great solution. I also think sometimes families pick the individual within their family that is the most successful. They are the ones that are most responsible. They are also often the ones that are the busiest or running their own businesses as well. And so I think families don't always know, and sometimes that decision to name a trustee in a trust document is a 10-second decision as part of the estate planning without really understanding the role that trustee is going to play down the road in support of the beneficiaries.
Right.
So I think just being able to have the dialogue and the conversation and kind of to remove the mystique about some of it and to kind of open up the conversations. And what I'm seeing is more and more advisors in their planning role are talking to families about these issues, which is opening up the dialogue and conversation for families to feel comfortable about how they need to explore these options.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think as you mentioned, the banking world has evolved and changed so much, and with consolidation, or you work with a relationship manager who is maybe at one bank at one point and their career takes them in a different direction, and now you're stuck with someone else, or you're working with a bank that's a local community bank, and it was great, and then all of a sudden
they're required by the big bank.
Exactly. So corporate trustees can come in different shapes and formats. The bank model was where you cut your teeth,
right?
And it's still a model that is available out there.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about the other side of the coin, and if you don't have a bank or a trust company that's doing everything, talk a little bit about the directed trustee model, and maybe why many years ago you all decided that might be a better path for you guys.
No, I think that's great. So currently headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. So I joke that I was not born and raised in Tennessee. But Tennessee is one of the states very early on that got very progressive in their trust laws. So I think I've got to credit Tennessee and their statutory environment for creating a platform that a directed trust, independent trustee could exist. And so that allowing that model to be established allowed us to kind of differentiate ourselves in that way. One of my first bosses who I had been at that bank with and then subsequently started Cumberland with, his perspective was families with wealth have great teams. They've got their advisor, they have their attorney, they have their CPA, alternative asset or business interest or business advisor, and just because a trust structure could be a good solution for them, they shouldn't lose the continuity. And so he kind of brought that into our vision initially, and we compared that to the legislation in Tennessee and said, how could we create something? So it was unique at the time, over 23 years ago, to say, hey, we know that this is a little bit different, but we also know that the advisory community's got great relationships. And at the time, at Cumberland's inception, we worked with a lot of the wirehouse advisors that had an in-house trust solution, but it wasn't always the right solution, or they may not take all the business that the advisors has. That kind of opened up the door to building the platform. And so we just decided to commit to it. And what we've really seen over the last 10 years is the independent and RIA advisors kind of coming forward. They may have been a part of those larger organizations at one time. They chose to be independent for the reasons that we all understand, wanting to be independent. And now we have advisors coming to us and saying, now we need that trust solution. We're building our business. We're working with first generation wealth. We know there's going to be a need for some of these services in the road. And how do we have a trust company that will partner? And so I think our 20-year head start in figuring out this structure or this format makes us a great solution. And so it just kind of opens up the conversation again to the families to know how it works in a directed trustee. So to get a little bit narrow on directed trustee is, states across the country are embracing directed trust, and that means something a little bit different in each jurisdiction. In our space in Tennessee and in some of the surrounding contiguous states that are kind of open to directed trustees or directed trust model, it's allowing the segregation of duties and responsibilities underneath that trust, and allowing a trustee to either create a directed trust or allowing the grantor wealth creators to create it. State to state, it's a little bit different. But in our platform, we look to the qualified beneficiaries and or the wealth creators, the grantors of the trust, to establish that trust, and to allow us to focus on the trust administration side, allow the investment advisor to focus on what they do best, which is managing the money.
Yeah. And what we always tell people, so you were here meeting with a potential one of our clients just before this, and you all have talked with several of our clients. We have clients who have you all named. One thing I always tell people is, you've gotten to know us over many years and advisors over many years, and you trust us, you trust whatever advisor you're working with. And the benefit that I see, a huge benefit just in plain Jane terms, is, we get to continue our relationship that the client knows, and we can continue hand-holding the relationship with your kids and the legacy of whatever you want. We can do the money side of it. We can do the soft science side of it. Hopefully we've built relationships with those kids over the years, and the continuity is there, and then we can bring in a legal expert, a trust expert to come partner. And one thing that there's many different ways to do the directed trustee model as well, and there's some that are very hands-off, maybe too hands-off, but very hands-off. One thing that I like about you all is you all do have trust officers who can also come in and mirror that relationship and help us and the beneficiaries along that path as it continues down through whatever the trust document says and whatnot.
And Andy, that's a great point. And I think what I've learned kind of in this role is, the trust that you have with the relationships with the clients that you serve is so significant in the partnership that we have. And I used to walk around selling this model, directed trust. And I've learned that I needed to say directed with regards to investments, because in our model, we take full fiduciary responsibility for everything else administrative. There are other directed trust states, kind of like you said. I almost say it's not trustee in name only, because they have the fiduciary responsibility, but it is very limited in its scope. And sometimes they're directed with regards to all distributions, and sometimes that they're directed with, there's so many other people coming to the table because that's what certain families are looking for. That's the structure that works. But what we decided early on is we wanted to be that high touch service. And we wanted to work with advisors who were already differentiating themselves in the service that they provide their clients. So we wanted you to look at us and see that same commitment in supporting what you're doing and obviously supporting the clients.
Yeah, no, I like that. And so I think one feedback that we get from people about trusts and designing a trust is kind of two ends of the spectrum. One is, I'm scared to say anything in the trust document because life will change and it will evolve, and I'm just afraid to put something down on paper. And then the other one is the opposite, where they want to put all kinds of criteria down. And probably neither are great. But talk a little bit about, because I know this is a common theme when we talk to people of, how is this nowadays 50-page documents? How's this trust document going to be interpreted by a stranger who is ultimately going to have the power of how it's handled? So talk a little bit about your all's discretion with making choices of when money can go out. And obviously the trust has a lot of control over that. But when it comes to a discretionary moment, how do you all decide that?
Well, you mentioned I was meeting with some clients before this time, and similar question kind of came up. And I think, having an opportunity to partner with advisors, identify those clients. I often get asked the question, we don't get paid until we serve, so why are we spending so much time in this, what we call future business space? And I think it's exactly what you've described. Having an opportunity to sit across the table from the wealth creator or the individuals that you're going to serve in that capacity, you're going to serve their next generation. But having an opportunity, because of the relationship that you have, being able to partner with you and know that you are aware of how they were thinking, what their intent was, what was going to happen, and then being able to sit across from them and say, this is the legalese of the document, and it can be as specific as you need it to be. But when it says education, what does that mean to you? How do we kind of capture that information? And to be able to sit around the table and all of us have that conversation, we're going to remember that. We're going to notate that, and as we approach those discretionary decisions in the future, we're able to come back to this team and say, I remember, or make that introduction to a trust officer who's talking to that next generation. Our trust officer can say, we can go back to Andy and team, because how would the clients have wanted that interpreted? What would have been important in that situation? And it's also the legacy of being able to sit with the next generation and say, this is what your parents wanted, or here's how we navigated, or here's how we asked these questions. And I think it just solidifies that relationship with what you are doing with those beneficiaries, as well as what we're bringing to support it. And so I think it's a unique space in the financial services aspect of being able to have the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility, but having the privilege of knowing grantor intent. So I think the earlier that we know about those opportunities, an opportunity to review those documents, to be able to sit in conversation with those family members is beneficial, and we can circle back to that on an ongoing basis. It just makes us more prepared to pick up the ball and run with it when we need to at some point in the future.
I agree with that, and I think one thing I try to remind people is there's a fiduciary duty on both sides as far as spending money. There's a fiduciary duty not to protect it all, because ultimately the money is there to be used.
Right, absolutely.
But then there's fiduciary duty also to balance that with, let's not spend through it too quickly. One of my first boss says it's got to pass the smell test. It has to, and it does on both sides. So I do think that's one, typically with a conversation, if anyone's feeling nervous, that tends to be the number one question that we get. I do think it's a good just memory that there's there's a responsibility on both sides.
Absolutely.
And usually history will dictate kind of how loose you can be with things.
That's exactly right.
So brag on Cumberland Trust a little bit. Tell us about your business, employees, footprint. Give us kind of under the hood.
So there's so many great things, Andy. I think I had a chance to share with you a couple months ago, but having the privilege of turning the lights on 23 years ago and knowing that we believed in the model, but not really sure where it was going to go. And I like to kind of look back and look at it at kind of 5-year segments. But we, started in Nashville, kind of got our feet wet in Tennessee, establishing some different offices. And then we had an opportunity to open our first regional office, which was Atlanta. So if you kind of fast forward, we're now in Atlanta, Georgia, Texas, Florida, covering North and South Carolina, Virginia, into Northern Virginia. We're in St. Louis, covering the Chicago market, have an office in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. And right now I'm currently working on our Midwest footprint. We're moving into Indiana. Just was in Indianapolis last week, Ohio, having calls, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Just there's a lot happening, and I think it's because the model is resonating. And I think it's advisors it's the independent market that's looking for it. So as I look back over the last 20 years, we knew we were going to make an impact. We knew that we would provide a higher touch service engagement. We knew because we weren't managing the money, we could focus our resources on higher touch service models that maybe some of the larger institutions were shying away from. So really proud of our estate and postmortem administration group. They do a phenomenal job in the jurisdictions where we can serve in that role. So
not to interrupt you, but talk a little bit about that, because we do often have clients who they have kids, but maybe their kids are not financially savvy or savvy in general. How can you guys come in and help with the estate process?
So estate or even ongoing trust relationships, because we're in a directed trust model, we're very comfortable in co-fiduciary appointments. So sometimes you really want that family member involved in some form or fashion. Maybe they're willing to do it. Maybe they do it begrudgingly because they know they've been asked to do it. So we're very comfortable serving as co-executor or co-successor trustee. Revocable trusts are providing for that same estate and postmortem administration outside of probate. In almost any state, we can navigate a successor trustee under a revocable trust to do that estate administration. Not in every state can we be executor or personal representative, but we can help navigate those issues. And so sometimes an individual is named, but we are agent and we handle all the day-to-day work. So there's a lot of flexibility. That's my favorite thing, is there's so much flexibility in our model to customize what the clients need. So those co-fiduciary roles. So real quick, back to Cumberland. Really proud. It happened at the beginning of the year. A little bit market fluctuation happened again. We're consistently over $8 billion in assets under administration, AUA, assets under administration. And those relationships come from advisors and attorneys. I mean, our business development efforts are focused on those relationships because those are the individuals who know the clients that have the trust needs. And so just very kind of organic in our growth. And now really excited to add some additional business development members, growing these regional market footprints, and then also the corporate footprint. That's
great, because it was not too long ago you're at $5 billion. I remember that number, which had to have only been a couple of years ago.
3.9 right before the pandemic.
Yeah, that speaks to the quality of work you guys are doing as well.
Well, and just the opportunity to see the regional markets start to see the growth that we knew that they're capable of.
Let's say from the trust side, so estate side was one thing. So post death, figuring everything out, the estate side. Once it's all figured out from the trust administration side, what's a maybe typical client size of your all's, and what's I know you guys probably don't have a hard minimum, but when does it start to not make sense?
No, I think that's a great question. And people often ask me, what's the ideal client? I think it's as unique as the advisors that we work with in the circumstances, because I think we're seeing and you and I may have talked about this another time, but we're seeing the average account opportunity is significantly higher than it used to be. Part of what's happening in the economy, part of what's happening as we begin to contemplate this next generational wealth transfer. Coming out of the pandemic, we're starting to see the M&A market get hotter again. Businesses are looking at being sold. Planning is beginning to happen. The sunset of the exemption in 2026. There's just so much activity. So where years ago, a $5 million client used to be significant. Now that $5 million client is a $7 million client or a $10 million client. But that client may not have all of their assets in fiduciary accounts yet. So what it's sometimes easier for me to say is those opportunities that, as you mentioned, it may not be the right fit. And I think in our high touch service areas, our elder care area, our special needs area, we're looking for $2 million in liquidity in those relationships to kind of make fees make sense. We don't ever want a fee to be an impediment in working together. And we really haven't adjusted our fees over the last 20 years. We want to be flexible in making sure that the fee proposal that we're making is appropriate for the work that's being done. So our average relationship size is probably in the $4.5 to $5.5 million range. But again, we're seeing significant assets, and we have clients with $200 million, and we have clients with $2 million. And we're just, I've always believed that the $2 to $10 million trust client is incredibly underserved, especially in the large institutions. And now we're seeing those numbers tick up to 15 million or 20 million. So really for us, it's about the service delivery. I had another advisory group say, if you need a trustee in name only and to put a trust on the shelf, maybe a directed trust company out west. I won't pick on any of those specific, jurisdictions. But if you need a trust company that's going to if an advisor needs a trust company that's going to partner with them and have a relationship with the beneficiaries, Cumberland is a good solution.
Yeah, very good. So if we identify someone who may fit that mold, when's the right time to have a conversation about this? Obviously your 20-year-old, that's too young, your 30-year-old high-income earner going to be there one day. Maybe that's too soon. When would be a good time, other than the immediate need?
I'm a believer, Andy. I'm a believer that if they are willing to go through the planning aspects and they believe that a trust is going to be beneficial, because the 30-year-old, I always say the most important decision a 30-year-old is making with estate planning, if they've got a good advisory team, is if they have children, who's going to take responsibility of the children if something happens to them. And the bifurcation of that choice could be that we really trust this person to take care of the children, but do we want that person to also have responsibility for the money? So I think really they're
usually not.
Right. Even in my own document, it was segregated. So, but I think the advisors are the ones that are going to know. I think if you're doing the planning with the clients and that a trust, either because of the size of the assets or the complications of the situation, it is worthy of a conversation. It's worthy of a 30-minute, and now we can do it on Zoom or however, and answer their questions, because again, as they're doing their planning, they're not even really thinking about what a trustee would do, but they know that they're going to want it in trust or in protection at least for some period of time. So I think it's worthy of the conversation and getting them comfortable, because then they're going to feel more comfortable with that decision and the peace of mind that's been taken care of. So I don't think there's a bad time to have the conversation. Now, the times that are hard for me are when the clients are significantly older and there's a unique circumstance with a particular beneficiary, and it's a conversation that they're avoiding because they don't know how a corporate entity is going to step in and help facilitate that. Whether that's an alcohol or mental health related issue, whether it's a true special needs situation. And the hardest thing is to have an 80-year-old parent with a 55-year-old child that's never lived outside of the home, and there's no planning that's been done. So those are the ones that are we've missed the boat on those.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing just to kind of come back to real quick as we're wrapping up, tax planning. So tax planning has been the breadth of people that is covered, obviously, with where the estate tax threshold is today. It's much less than where it was 5 years ago, and there for a while, $1 million estate tax included a lot of people. So as we're keeping an eye on the end of 2025 and what happens with the estate tax threshold, are you all starting to see people think through that more, and then looking to be more involved with having a corporate trustee for those?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So I think in jurisdictions like Tennessee, there's definitely tax advantages to establishing trusts. in a state like Tennessee to help minimize some of the tax impact. What we're seeing families, especially with family businesses, go ahead and add business interest into those trusts, get those trusts established ahead of an event, regardless if they know when that's going to be or they anticipate that to be at some point in the future, going ahead and using those assets to do that exemption planning. If I could offer any advice just from the legal community that I work with, is they're already busy and they know what's coming.
Yes.
So if you have drafts or documents or plans, continue those conversations and be prepared for whatever that might look like. I say that as a non-attorney because we know we're going to, at the 11th hour, be helping families navigate a lot of those issues.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think that we're going to continue to see those. I think most people believe there's going to be a change in those exemptions. I always see the pendulum swing with life insurance trusts. I think life insurance trusts will come back into favor in some of those situations as well. But I think if you haven't had the conversations, have them. And if you have, keep them at the forefront as you kind of make those.
Yeah,
those
especially the
planning.
business owners. We a couple of years ago, we were working with a business owner who they were probably going to have an event in a year or 2 years later, and if it went well, business could 10x, and if it didn't go well, they weren't going to have much. So we put it in a trust. And,
Yes.
use some estate planning techniques, and fortunately it did more than 10x, and it was out of their state. So
we've got one of those. I just met with them earlier last week. So same situation. They came and saw us probably 3 or 4 years ago, and when they had done their documents 20 years ago, they felt like their estate 20 years ago was probably in the $4 to $5 million range. When they came back probably 5 or 6 years ago, it was in the $30 million range, but they thought it was going to get to 120, and they came back and it's double that. So I mean, it's significant.
There's a lot of opportunity there. Well, thank you.
No, my
Anything
pleasure.
you want to add before we wrap up?
No, just love to be here. Want to be a solution for you and for your
Absolutely.
clients. And if anybody needs anything, you know where to find us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for making the trip to Lexington and for coming in here. And thank you all for listening in today. If there's anything that we can do to help or for an introduction to Cumberland Trust, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Great.